Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Conversation Capital. Ubonga, Bursha, girl, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am awesome, thank you. My name is Ursula Mariani, and I am the host of the conversation. I never know what to say after saying my name because it's like people are like, you should say your name. I'm like, every episode at some point they should know our names actually.
Yeah,
Right.
They
At some
should
point,
all look down in the description.
honestly, guys, it's getting exhausting. Anyway, today's topic is not exhausting at all. We've got a sexologist. And so we're going to be touching all things to do with sexology. We've got Elvis Munatwa. Munatwa. Oh my gosh.
She thought she's being like perfect by the zwa.
Yeah.
I could get
Munatwa.
Should have paused a little bit of a pause.
I'm sorry. I keep trying to get his name right, but I keep missing it. Okay. So Elvis is a sexologist, and off air, like I kept using sexologist and sex therapist interchangeably. And so maybe let's just start there. Let's start with the delineation of what is a sexologist? What's the difference between a sexologist and a sex therapist? And what is it? Yeah, what is it that you do? And maybe question number 2, just segueing off into that, is what does your day-to-day look like? A day at the office for a sexologist. Yes, please, go.
This is an interesting one, right? But loosely, people have used sexology and sex therapy as the same. But if you think about it, sex therapy is just a method of intervention available to the sexologist, right? But there are people that don't have the sexology training that act as sex therapists. So in that includes sex coaches, right? It includes body movement coaches. It includes people that even do tantric massage, right? People that do touch therapy, right? But the scope is extremely limited. But if you're looking at sexology now, sexology is, in a way, it comes out of 3 distinct fields: medicine, psychology, and social work, right? So a sexologist could be one of the 3 in their prior training. And in this, they learn different methods of looking at problems that emanate from sex. So a psychologist who's a sexologist would look at how, for example, hormonal balance or imbalances causes sexual problems. A medical doctor would look at maybe the body itself, what's causing the body to not react or respond to give the sexual urge or pleasure that the person needs. And social worker would look at the context in which this sexual dysfunction is happening. So the interventions are quite distinct, right? But because as a sexologist, you work with allied health professionals, the 3 almost always work together. And in instances where a sexologist is by themselves, they have a good referral network to a physiotherapist if it requires physiotherapy or in terms of body movement, or it requires a doctor for the prescription of some other drugs that may be necessary. So if you're looking at that, then a sex therapist, for example, may not have all those avenues available.
Okay. And what does a day in the office look like?
So one of the main things we deal with is relationships and couples, right? So we're looking at people who have discordant sexual patterns of behavior. So, for example, people might be in a relationship, in a consummated relationship, or apparently consummated relationship, where they should be having regular intercourse, but they don't because one of them or both of them have a challenge or a problem. And now when we're looking at this problem, we don't look at the problem as it's this person's problem versus that person, because they come to us as a couple, right? Then we find solutions that help them as a couple, because, for example, if one goes through therapeutic interventions, like, for example, let me make reference to dyspareunia, which is painful sex, right? For a lady who has it and as a partner.
It's called?
Dyspareunia,
okay.
Right? For example, a lady who has it, who is in a relationship, it means intercourse will not happen because she experiences pain. Therefore, in the period that she's going through this intervention, the partner should go through with it also so that they balance the expectations and the emotions out of it, right? So now we have to put them in the same room but separate them also, so that we deal with the person with the particular problem and how to deal with the problem medically if we have to, and then deal with how that affects their relationship in the long run. Because at the end of the day, coming to us is looking for help. Therefore, we're trying to help that the union stays
intact.
Yes.
Sure.
Speaking of unions, on the lighter note, how much percentage would you say sex contributes to a healthy?
It's a funny one because in the beginning of any relationship, sex is about 80%. As the relationship ages 5, 10, 20 years, maybe 25%. So in a 10-year relationship cycle, in the beginning, sex is like 80%. In the 10th year, sex is like 25%.
And this
the importance of it.
And this percentage is between both people. Like there's no necessarily someone stepping out to go feed that or.
So no, maybe let's make this more interesting, right? When I say 80% in the beginning,
Yes.
it's because you barely know each other enough to have other conversations that might be uncomfortable at the beginning. So you compensate for what you don't have with what you have, right? More sex, right? It doesn't decrease the frequency of sex 10 years down the line, but the importance of that sex changes.
Interesting.
Right? In the beginning, if there's no sex in any relationship, the relationship is likely to die down.
True.
But over the long term, the relationship may not die down because there's less frequent sex, right? Because sex at that point, 10 years down the line, may not be as important as it was 5 months into the relationship. Because 5 months into the relationship, people have questions that they want answered. Do you find me attractive? Do you find me sexually attractive? Are you willing to do things with me that I want you to do with me? So those questions are not answered in the beginning, but 10 years down the line, we kind of have all answers to those questions.
Sure, this is interesting, especially when you speak to the uncomfortable conversations and maybe the different needs at the time. Trevor Noah has that short clip that went around to say, what is it that sometimes men sometimes need vulnerability more than it is sex? The intimacy that they need is not necessarily sex, but they think that that's the only way they can get into it. So maybe just even knowing your person 10 years down the line, knowing that my man needs a hug. But before, when you're in a younger relationship, it translates as, oh, my man wants the D. Oh, the P. We don't know. So yes. I read,
and I like the fact that it's not necessarily about the frequency that decreases, it's the importance.
The importance is how important it is that decreases. Okay, that was a good question, actually.
I was not expecting
you
that.
You looked with yourself as well.
Sure. But think of it this way also, right? When you talk about frequency, right? Frequency remains an issue from the beginning right through to the end of a relationship. Because the less it is, means something else for a relationship. The decrease of intercourse in any relationship is a signal of something not going right. Never that the relationship is comfortable. So maybe let me put it this way. When sex was frequent in the beginning or at some point, and the intercourse was like at regular intervals, then it reduces, then like people make a joke that if you're single, you could have sex 52 times in a year. If you met it for 10 years, you could have sex 12 times in a year, which is basically once a month, right? So if you think of it that way, there's a lot that's going on that makes the sex not to happen. So a decrease in sex or sexual intercourse in a relationship is never a good thing. But when it is there, then we need to figure out what has happened. Because as we age, for example, our bodies don't react the same way, right? But the desire itself does not change. You still have that urge to, engage in sexual encounters.
Just your body isn't necessarily relating with that desire. That's maybe, yeah, I hear what you're saying. But what about in relationships where, like you're saying, it doesn't necessarily translate to being comfortable, but surely, if you're talking about it's less important, then it's not that deep to have it less the older you get, or no. Yeah.
So think of it this way, right? Like the frequency does not change, right? So for example, it's like let me use breakfast, right? Some people want eggs 3 times in a week, and they want a healthy breakfast with muesli or something else in yogurt 2 times in a week, right? And their routine is the same. It doesn't change much. So in a relationship, sex is like that. At some point, you reach your peak, and by peak I mean the peak of frequency. Like if you have like 3 times in a week, 5 times in a week, 7 times in a week, then once you've reached that equilibrium, or you have plateaued, right? Once you have plateaued, that pattern remains the same across the lifespan, right? So if you have plateaued at 3 times a week, if it reduces to like once,
Yes.
the frequencies change.
Yes.
And now there's a problem to it.
Okay.
It may not be as important because people are maybe not in the same city, or you're not doing the same things, you have different work schedule. Maybe you're a doctor during the day and she's a nurse, she's working night. So you don't see each other. In those instances, there's exceptions, right? But if you're in the same house, in the same room at the same time, 7 days a week, then it reduces from 7 to 3 to 2 to none, then there's something going on there.
Something's going on.
Something's definitely.
What about scheduling sex? So somebody's listening to this episode and they're like, something's going on. And I know some people are against the concept of scheduling sex, but I don't know, I'm of the thinking that it can save a relationship if 2 people are committed to intentionally being present at a
setting
specific
out
time.
certain time. Yeah.
But some people can say it takes away from the spark and the spontaneity of what sex is supposed to be. So what's your opinion as a professional? Would you say schedule it, or?
My thinking is schedule time together, not schedule sex. Because if you schedule sex, it becomes mechanical, right? Our bodies work in a funny way, right? In nature, what you use, you keep. What you don't use, you lose, right? So for example, if you get a spark because you have a thrill, right? And if you get to experience whatever that thrill is, it stays. But if that thrill is not met with the right response, that thrill goes. But it just doesn't go. It becomes a negative emotion because it's a negative experience, right? Which is, in a relationship, in my opinion, if a partner initiates sex and the other one refuses or denies the opportunity for an encounter to happen, the more frequent it happens, the less the sex happens, even when the other partner now wants to initiate, because that negative emotions concord and build bigger resistance over the lifespan, right? So if you think of it this way, if a couple is not going well and things are not going well, and they take sex out of that relationship, to bring sex into that relationship becomes an extreme challenge. It's like an extreme sport. So maybe if we understood each other that beyond our physical or verbal arguments, our bodies react to each other, then maybe let's switch off.
Yes, soldier through.
And then do what we need to do. Once we've done what we need to do.
Okay. So basically you're saying it can be so difficult to return to sex.
Extremely difficult.
Yeah, it can be so difficult to return to sex that even when you're going through a tough time, you'd rather still preserve the having sex. Right? So you and I are still not talking.
It's the only thing that's there.
But let us continue having sex, because if we are still trying to work on this and fix it, we will fix it
that
alongside this running parallel to still continuing to have sex.
Because think about it this way. Besides the feel-good feel, right? Sex has hormones that are secreted when you're having it, like serotonin, for example, right? These are happy hormones, right? And these happy hormones make lighter conversation, right? I find you more attractive. Besides finding you more attractive, I find you more caring, more considerate. Because during the encounter, you do things that make me happy. And how do things that make you happy? So as we exchange these moments, I cannot any longer remain as frustrated by your actions, even though they remain as important to me. So it helps change perception on what our actual problem is. But sometimes it also gives us time, like we buy time, that actually maybe we're not ready to deal with that issue right now. Let's pack it and let's do what we do best, right? And in that moment, you find each other. And as you find each other, you realize actually, maybe this is good. But now, if there's some sort of resistance and then the sex is gone, so cortisol increases, right? Stress hormones. Now you're stressed, right? And then stress sometimes builds anxiety because you don't know what's going to happen next.
Now you're not even level-headed enough to deal with the issue in itself.
Now,
because
you're just being sent castles, right? And it's a lot. And
I like what you're saying.
so you realize now, how many people are actually doing this is a difficult question to answer because people sit with their emotions and they want affirmation of their emotions. They want validation that you can see me, I can see you. And we're not using sex for you to ignore me. Because we're so concerned about affirmations these days, that in validation, that we forget that actually besides or beyond the validation and affirmation, our bodies react differently to what we want in our heads, right? And to balance the two off is a difficult thing because generally when people are discordant, they want to return into their safe space, and their safe space closes space for conversation, right? So you're hurt, therefore you want to sleep in your own room, and at that point you've lost your partner.
You create this gap.
You've created what you think is a small gap is actually not a small gap, because that person would never know exactly what you think of them, no matter how much you explain, because they will always think that at that point where you were vulnerable, you chose yourself over the relationship. So now
it will create an insecurity that will
imagine that also coupled with sexual dysfunction, that at the moment that you want to engage in sexual encounters, then things don't go right. Maybe you're anxious, and as the gentleman you have erectile dysfunction. You don't have the perfect erection for that job. Or as a female, you're not wet enough for the job, right? And you might soldier on and then there's pain. Or you might try and it doesn't work out. Then now you're looking at each other and asking questions like, do you still find me attractive? So the insecurity that is built there might be difficult to sort of fix in the future. You might need to rethink the strategies that you use when you're fighting.
Sure.
Because then it is important that you don't lose the spark.
Yeah. All of us are just like, hey. That was okay.
And then we always hear about like porn, right? What is the impact of porn on relationships, if at all?
I might come with a little bit of a controversial opinion here, but porn consumed by a single person is not the same as porn consumed by a couple.
Okay.
If you watch porn, you have behaviors associated or that result in you watching porn. For example, if you watch porn for self-gratification, you might then masturbate to it, which is good for you at the moment. If you're a couple, it might help you figure out things that excite you together. And you might want to experiment, or you might laugh, or you might learn a thing or two. The challenge is, if you watch porn by yourself and you develop this pattern of behavior, Alfred Kinsey did research in the 1940s. It's not the most ethical research, but the research is there nonetheless. The experiments that they did, and they found out that if a particular person or person X masturbates frequently over a period of time, for them to orgasm, they need to be in that exact same position for them to orgasm. So, say for example, your erection or your desire for sex is induced by watching porn. You then need porn to get arousal, and then you need to masturbate in that particular order or fashion for you to orgasm, right? Now, if you're with a partner, your partner needs to stroke you in the same exact manner you please yourself to orgasm. Now, we have a problem that one person will not orgasm. But the second challenge is that the porn is not there for you to get aroused. So that doesn't work for a relationship at all, because the desire for intercourse decreases because your fix or your go-to place is porn. But if you're watching it together and you're watching it at different intervals for different things, like you want to learn certain behaviors, like how do you respond to that stimulus, right? Or how do you perfect yourselves, or how do you do dangerous stunts, because sometimes the stunts that you watch is like, damn, right? So now it's meant for conversation within the relationship. So should you watch porn as a couple? Probably not. Preference, really. Should you watch porn on your own? What's in a relationship? That creates a lot of problems. And body objectification, right? You start to objectify the body that you want to have sex with. You want to objectify the size of the penis you want to have sex with. You want to objectify the sounds that people make when they're having intercourse. And all those things become superficial and never a reality in your sex life.
An unrealistic expectation that you create in your mind when you, I like that.
And then now you expect your partner to do miracles, because even you would never communicate exactly what you want, because whatever they do would never be Maya Khalifa or someone, it will never be. And for them, it's not the porn star that's their ideal. It's you that their ideal, who needs to be like that, and you will never be, because you're just a regular person.
Sure. You are asking good questions today. I don't know how to come back from the good. You're asking some real good questions today. Okay. So looking at just you on a social perspective, being a sexologist, I'm so interested in because I know that you've got a clinical psychology background and this and that, but in the context of being a sexologist, how has it played a role with you? As soon as you walked in, we were all just we have sex questions for you, And I can imagine socially, friends, interactions, brides. Are you the guy that's always talking about sex?
So actually, when I was younger, maybe 10 years ago, it was a conversation starter. I'm sitting with my friends, like, hey, he's a sexologist, right? It was sparked interest, right? Now, when a social setting, there's alcohol involved, we get excited, right? But as I've aged, it's actually a non-entity, right? Someone says a sexologist, so okay, you're a hairdresser, it is what it is, A job is a job, right?
Yeah.
So at this point, it's not a thing.
It's not. Yeah, you're used to it now. It's not a thing.
It's not a thing.
Okay.
But when I do get asked, I usually ask for a fee. If you want to talk about this, can I bill you? Because you can't ask a lawyer for free legal advice.
Yes, that's true.
So if you want to ask questions, my clock is ticking. My clock is ticking. Better pay me.
that's in a social call. But do you ever feel like you didn't want it to be mentioned about you?
Actually,
so a sort of shame.
No, actually,
Does your mom know?
I did one interview many years ago on, I think the program was called Shift.
Yes.
Yeah. And they asked me, I think that was my first time to say the word vagina on TV broadcast. My sister was watching. In my head, I could hear her say, "Oh, Elvis." But at that moment, I felt so liberated, you know. I was like, actually, I can say more. I can say
Vagina,
more.
vagina, vagina.
Vagina. Yes, okay.
And
I like that actually. That moment that just liberates you from like a
I
certain.
mean, she's already had me. What's the worst that could happen? And since then, I'm like, if you ask me a question because you genuinely want help, I'll give you a response.
Yes.
But if you ask me because it's fun to you, you think it's like you want to joke and mock
Comical,
me,
yes.
then I think I give the same attitude, you know. I respond to stupid questions with stupid responses, you know. So, yeah.
Yeah, plus sex still makes us giddy. Like,
Yes,
so-
yes. But speaking of that, I mean that I think that definitely is, but maybe worldwide context. But I always in the context of myself and what I know in African context. You know, do you think the giddiness or the secrecy around sex is preventing people firstly from having better sex or good sex, or do you think that you know secrecy is still very important?
You know, there's a phrase or it's a sentence that says when something is secretive, there's something about it. But the something about it is usually the not good part. So, in the African context, people do talk about sex, but their conversations, like maybe let me say men and females, males and females, their conversations about sex are a little bit different. My conversations, at some point I ran a group called the Circle of Men, where it was a conversation about men who had erectile dysfunction that we ran a support group for. And in these conversations, we're trying to find out what are the common things among them that they want to talk about. And in this, they were always excited about getting an erection, for example, completing the deed in 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes. The longer it is, the more accomplished they felt. But sometimes the person they were having it with was the accomplishment, whether they performed or not.
wow.
Right? And then we did the same thing with females, and we also called it the circle of women. And in terms of their conversations, they talked about a lot of things: how he smells, how he looks at her, how she sees the passion in him, how she gets excited by seeing him get an erection, how she's excited about his panting after they are done, and how she watches him sleep. So, because these conversations are different, it is almost impossible to have a single conversation where males and females agree to what's
Good sex is.
good sex is. And because there's no standard for good sex is mostly personal,
Yeah.
right? It's extremely subjective. But this subjectivity is not repetitive. It's difficult to repeat good sex. What happens though is the more you like someone, even bad sex feels like good sex. The more you are connected to someone, you would excuse bad sex and actually look at what could have been the problem.
Don't you think that's a woman thing? Do men do that?
Men and women. Because in a relationship, in the beginning, it might be a little bit difficult because you don't know each other very well. But as your relationship grows, you start to see that it has depth, right? And if you have bad sex with the person that you are in love with, for example, you might want to understand, maybe not in that moment, what went wrong. Maybe 2 days later, maybe 3 days later. But if the relationship is for now, right now, you want to know what happened. So the conversations that you have are a little bit different. Because if I was paying, for example, for sex now, and I don't get it, should I still pay for it? But if we are there together and we're going to go to the kitchen, make some food, we have an opportunity for another encounter that we might redeem ourselves. So because I like you and you like me, it's a safe space for me to tell you, for example, hey, you know what? I had a cramp that time, so I couldn't finish, you know? But in the instance that we don't know each other that well, that becomes the impression I have of you.
Yeah.
That's what I would tell my friends. That's what I'll tell anybody else that cares to listen. And when that happens, it is also what I tell everyone else that I meet. For example, oh, that girl wasn't so good. Oh, man, I failed to perform, man, that was rough, right? Now, most people don't internalize this. They bounce back, it's like, actually, I'll do better next time. But those that internalize it, it becomes a self-loathing experience where they never get out of it, and they're afraid of new encounters because they fear they would never perform. And that anxiety that develops causes sexual dysfunction.
Yeah.
Wow.
It can make the whole experience so excruciating that, yeah.
So now you have performance anxiety.
Yeah.
So it's not always physiological. It could be related to
psychological.
Yeah.
Yes. So your exposure moment is an important part of this. Because your exposure moment or your resolution of your exposure moment determines your behavioral response from then and going forward. In the event that your exposure moment, you discounted it and it's like, it's nothing, it happens, and you bounce back in the next encounter, and one after that and one after that, then you go back to full function, right? But in the event that you sit with it for a while, then the next encounter, it happens that you have performance anxiety, then the performance anxiety sits with you. And it becomes a chance encounter. But if you add other things, now people want to see if actually they have a problem or not. So they might
Step out.
maybe step up, but they want to see it by themselves. They want to masturbate, right, and see if they get the high or the fix. They might use porn, for example. They might use things that give them that high, so that they can convince themselves that they actually can still do it. Then at that point, they might then step out, right? They step out and see actually, wow, their engine is functional by themselves. Let's see if they try it, a different body. You see what happens. And now, if it happens to work there, and they come back to see if it worked outside, does it work back home? And if it doesn't work, that person will have a repetitive cheating pattern. But if it works out outside and it works back home, it might give them the restraint that actually maybe that was just a glitch, the software didn't work at that time. But now it's
the problems you're discussing seem so lopsided to men, right? The performance anxiety. But as a sexologist, maybe tell, because in my head I'm immediately thinking, have you experienced where performance anxiety can be seen or identified in women as well?
Yeah. So when I talk about performance anxiety, right, it's what happens before the encounter itself, right? So you start to worry about whether you'll be able to satisfy your partner in the manner that was consistent before. You start worrying about whether your partner will notice whether you're reacting differently to what you used to do before. And in that sense, you're no longer in the moment, but you're actively engaged in what you think your partner is feeling. So you might overcompensate and overdo things, or you might undercompensate and do nothing, right? So you realize that you never reach your moment, and you may yourself not reach the orgasmic point, because in your head all you really wanted was to make sure that the next person doesn't notice something is going on with you.
Yes.
And it goes both ways. For men it's visible because they need to have a physical erection.
Yes.
But for women it's the overcompensation or undercompensation, which leads to sometimes the missing opportunity for an orgasm. So maybe when you have intercourse and you don't orgasm,
it could be performance anxiety.
Think about it, like why you wanted someone to take you there, but didn't, because your expectations of what they could do may not be as realistic to your encounter or experience.
Are there physical discrepancies in sex, like physical mismatches?
I mean,
As an outside of everything emotional, everything, physical limitations to both you and her not being together.
I mean, people are different. And because people are different, see, the funny thing about sex, for example, unless you're both virgins, you're experiencing it for the first time. So neither of you know anything about it. So you learn as you go. But those moments are fewer and fewer as we age. So you come with expectations and experience, and you meet somebody with expectations and experience, and often we lie that we don't have expectations, but we do, because of our experience, right? And now when we meet someone new, for example, in the beginning, those expectations are really high. How do they perform when they're with me? But you also have expectations of your own, like I want to show them what I come with, right? In those moments, things might work, and if they work, great, the relationship becomes awesome. If they don't work, then the relationship doesn't proceed beyond the first date. You see, because if you think about, maybe if you expand when people are having sex with these days, like there's a new phrase I learned called sneaky links, right?
Yes.
If you have a sneaky link and they're not performing, and then why do
If
you need
you're
them?
like Ursula and Given, you are inept socially. A sneaky link is if a sneaky link is
I'm
if
pretending
you
like
have
I
a
know, but I didn't know what a sneaky link
you
was.
didn't know.
No.
Argue it.
I know.
Do you know what a sneaky link is? Okay.
A sneaky link is if you're in a relationship, right? You have a stable partner, and then you step out sometimes, and that's like your person to sneak out with. So it's
So
sneaky link.
makwapeni.
Yeah,
Actually,
but
maybe not. So
a bit lighter.
So a side, right, is not a sneaky link, right? A side is a side, right?
Yes,
But a sneaky link is somebody that knows
they are
the situation.
Yeah,
But they are just there for the hookup, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not even a
it's
relationship.
less serious.
Yeah.
It's not a relationship.
Yeah.
We are not. It's a sneaky link.
It's basically just.
We just said
I wanted y'all to understand at home. That's what I wanted.
I am so amazed that you.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of information. There's information that she knows that we may not.
No, of course we're just teasing her.
No, they
No,
tease
right?
me all the time. It's the standard
But-
on this show.
As I was saying, these discrepancies, right? So now, because of expectations, right? You come with size, for example. You're like, maybe you're used to a particular size, or particular length or girth, or somebody is used to a particular wetness, right? Like those expectations, right? Somebody, you're not as long as I'm used to, you're not as thick as I used to, or you don't get as wet as I'm used to, or you get more wet than I'm used to, right? So those expectations are there. And when things don't gel during the encounter, those things matter. You might think that their size is small, or you might think that they are a returned soldier. They've gone to war, they've seen many things, and now they cannot get the satisfaction that they desire, right? So, I can't help it.
Yeah, laugh. We're all trying to keep a serious face. Some things are funny. So yeah. So sometimes it could be the expectations. However,
Yeah. So then you see that the things don't match. So there's body differences, and body expectations are different. Then things just don't work out. If it ends with not working out, great. But people usually say things if things don't work out. They want you to know why they think things didn't work out.
Yeah.
and that can give you performance anxiety for the next relationship.
Clearly.
Okay, but is there a situation where somebody can soldier through a mismatch? right? So you get to a
Okay, come
relationship
see
and
you.
wetter than I expected, less wet than, and then you still say, but I still like this person. As a sexologist, what was your advice to that person? You can work around this and get to a place where you're having good sex, or
our role is to help, right? For example, let's match your expectations. But as we're matching your expectations, let's create new experiences. Because as you create new experiences based on realistic expectations, you start to see the other person a lot differently. Because if you're looking at someone through their organs, you might miss a whole human being. And when you miss a whole human being, you could care less for whatever happens.
I love what you're saying.
But if you then look at a whole human being, it becomes a human experience. And you realize that as young as we can be, our bodies do not remain the same as we age. An 18-year-old will not perform the same as a 40-year-old. And if you have expectations for an 18-year-old from a 40-year-old, maybe, just maybe, there's something wrong with you. And when you start expecting fireworks of 18-year-old from a 40-year-old, and you don't get it, and you have a problem with it, maybe find an 18-year-old. Change the person that you're having sex with for you to reach your desired milestones. But if you still have milestones for sex at a point where you're in a stable relationship, then maybe get out of that relationship. Accept that relationship is not for you, and find peace with yourself and get a new relationship. But the thing is, we never admit to fail as humans, right? We can never admit that I'm the one who's failing here. Let me gather my strength and walk, right? We always find fault in the next person. And as we argue, go back and forth, more unnecessarily, if you ask me. But then you come to us, then we try to help match your
and merge
expectations.
the expectations.
And what's interesting to me is that when you're saying maybe if you at 40 want someone that still performs like a 20-year-old or whatever, is that when we look at sex, we always look at the person who wants less as the wrong one. Instead of thinking, maybe where are your expectations? Are they the realistic ones?
Okay.
We always think the one with the higher sex drive, the that is the one in the better position. When we could just be two different human beings.
Yes. Who says the person with the higher sex drive is
the one
the
that's
one in the
correct.
right necessarily?
Yes.
Maybe that person's expectations of how often the sex thing is supposed to be happening are actually exceptionally high and unrealistic. You know. Ugh. Given there's so many sound bites here for today's episode, but I know for a matter of fact people are going to want to reach you. Could you please, before you leave, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for imparting so much knowledge with us. We're probably going to invite you again because I feel like this is one of those topics that have more expanding. However, please tell me, where can people reach you?
Actually, you can find us on socials, right? The Ebb Psychologist. So on X, Ebb Psychologist. On
Ape Psychologist.
X. Ebb, like URB Psychologist.
Okay. Yes, okay, yes.
On Facebook, Eben Psychologist. On Instagram, Eben Psychologist.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
we're available.
Yeah.
But we also have our website is down, but also it's www.ebenpsychologist.co.za.
Yes, and it's got generic information there on how to better your sex life.
Yeah.
I'm assuming. I don't know.
Since there's no standard, we can help you get somewhere.
Yes, I like that. I hope
okay.
when you leave this, when you stop listening to this conversation, that's the one thing we all leave with. There's no standard. Yeah.
Yes. It's about creating. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Elvis. Thank you. That was today's episode of The Conversation Capital. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For now, though, goodbye and God bless.